I'm here today with Sally Winter, a solo founder who grew up on free school meals in North London. She told me that up until the age of 21, she didn't even know that entrepreneurship existed. Yet by the age of 25, she had built and sold her CBD gin brand for 7 figures, with a total investment of £1,000 and no mentors. In this episode, we get into what it actually feels like and takes to build something from nothing with a brain that overthinks everything. Why your environment is either your rocket fuel or it is slow poison, and what nobody tells you about life after an exit. I know you're going to enjoy this one today, so let's get into it. But look, Sally, thank you for being on today. I am very much looking forward to this conversation. I've enjoyed the chats that we've had pre-air and over the last couple of weeks. So yeah, thank you for giving your time today.
Likewise, very excited.
So first question I want to ask is, if I could speak to someone who knew you as a kid, what would they say you were like?
Do you know what? That's an interesting one because I feel like I didn't have a good perception of who people thought I was as a kid. So it's very much in my own brain. One thing I do know that comes to mind when you ask that question is I was like hyper independent. Specifically, I remember when I was like, well, the story of when I was crossing a road at like 4 or 5 or whatever. And my dad was like, no, you have to hold my hand crossing the road. And I was like, I'll hold my own hand. And then I like clasped my hand and I like walked across the road. That hyper independence and wanting to be an adult really early on, I think, is what I remember. Like I always wanted to grow up. And to be fair, people like my mom's friends would say that I remember one woman saying that I looked like I was 24 when I was 12. So like I also looked a bit older, but yeah, I was desperate to do all the bad things, so get cigarettes, booze, blah, blah. I just wanted to be independent, to be honest. And so there was that side of things. And then, it's weird, isn't it? Because like your perception of self is not something, I think even to this day, like when you want to kind of understand your perception, you kind of just need to ask people like, what do you think of me? And even recently in the last couple of months, I've had people say things to me that you don't know what is exceptional. Like I'm a very curious person, but a couple of months ago, someone was like, you're disarmingly curious. And it's like a massive thing that I don't see to this degree with other people. And so I was like, oh, okay, that's kind of cool. I know I'm curious, but I don't know what spikes up as the like, I know Sally for that. Yeah, I guess that's a mix of who I was and also a very, very deep thinker. So I remember having a literal breakdown and an existential crisis type thing when I was 12. But I figured out to get by in the world, to travel, to have freedom, you have to have money. And I don't have money. I don't come from a family with money. So I was like, oh, I've got 2 options. I have to break the system or I'm going to have to like go underground, live off grid, blah, 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 blah. Be a hippie of types. I felt down about that for like 3 weeks, realizing I was at the bottom of the rung in a system that was very much formed around wealth.
Curious to hear your thoughts on this, because I, one, resonate with both those two things, but I also see it a lot in conversations that I have with people who have similar brains to us, where they are deep thinkers and that starts early, and they have this yearning for independence and autonomy and things like that from such a young age as well. Why do you think that's like a common pattern?
I think part of it, it's being very intense, it's being very opinionated, it's caring about certain things. And therefore, because there's an intensity going to things that you're interested in and you enjoy, and it's being challenged as well. And when you don't have that and you're forced into a box and it's boring, it's slow moving, and especially if you're a fast learner like I was, it's to be stuck in systems like school or not have control, etc. I mean, I think everyone wants control, or at least a perception of control over their life. But yeah, I think when you've got like a high-processing brain, you're already kind of living ahead in a sense, and you're kind of absorbing the world through a more mature lens, but you're stuck in a child's body. And that disconnect, I think, is always going to be extremely rough. Now thinking back, actually, the other 2 things I had was I was incredibly like, it was a weird thing of like, I was desperate for real connection, right? So like the opposite of what you get at school. And so I was very much like a bit of an outsider. I like flitted between groups. I was desperate to have this like meaningful friendship where someone would like have my back and we could tell each other everything. And so I was like very much wore my heart on my sleeve and tried to make those connections. But I kind of realized early on that that everyone at school was fake, basically. Everyone was like pushing out a persona version of them to fit into a group. And as much as that's my superpower, I think, just like being very like earnest and raw as an adult. But in school, it was a nightmare. And yeah, I desperately wished I could have taken joy and satisfaction from those surface level relationships, but I just couldn't. So yeah, that was also quite painful, basically. Existing as like this, and then being in that system was hard.
Again, I totally resonate with that. I was just calling my mind back to school as you were talking through there, and I had a very similar experience where I have always kind of floated between groups and tried like have one friend in this group, one friend in this group, and they were like the deeper, meaningful connections but it never blended together. That it wasn't like
Yeah.
one big group of guys or girls that were all really like interconnected.
And did you ever
And
have people who behave a certain way one to one, but then when they were out in the group, oh my god, like I had that. It's so awful because you know they can be that person, but then they're choosing to show up in a completely like almost like gaslighting your own experience. I specifically remember one girl in primary school actually was which was particularly honestly, it was all rough. I think primary school is actually worse than secondary school in many ways, but yeah, like she was like my one friend because I had to move schools and all of this and da da da. And like we actually hung out because we lived close together, we have sleepovers, but at school she was the popular girl and basically like didn't even look at me, talk to me, nothing. So it was like real head fuck.
yeah, find and found it very difficult to not speak to those things happening. I had no qualms at that point in time, just being quite direct in like, what? Why are you doing that? Like, why are you showing up or being performative or whatever it is? And obviously, that caused conflict and friction and things like that at school.
Yeah.
And I found myself in like those latter years of school as well for a number of different reasons, becoming very insular and very isolated. And again, it was almost like this weird existential crisis, both from me not believing in or agreeing with the schooling system and where I was going in my own life, but also seeing this like pantomime of social constructs where people like literally like an American film. You've got like the jocks, it was like the football lot. You've got the goths, you've got the nerds, and it was like that. And I was like, I could speak to all of them, and I did like so. Often got moved around in classes, and I would be put next to like the smart girl or the smart kid, which is highly unfair for them. And I would make friends with them and I would be like befriend them. And again, not in a manipulative way either. It would just be like, I just feel like my ability to make connections was really great. So I was like, I don't fit into any of these buckets. I was like, why is it like this? And I just couldn't make sense of it. And as a result became, yeah, very insular. You went to grammar school. Talk to me about your experience in what that was like. Again, whether you became aware at that point in time that maybe your brain was slightly different to those around you, or just in general, as you connect the dots back, what was that like for you going through that system?
Well, I mean, first of all, yeah, when I went through that process of transitioning from primary to secondary school, I had to apply for a bunch of schools. I spent a bunch of time doing all those practice papers and stuff. And my mum actually, yeah, submitted me to a bunch of like selective schools, as you call them, like grammar schools, I guess, where you'd have to either do the 11 plus or you'd have like specific exams. So the school I went to was, yeah, it's one of the top in the country. I had to do 3, 4 exams, I think, English, maths, verbal, non-verbal reasoning, etc. But actually, it's like the school I least wanted to go to. So when I found out, well, I hadn't actually got in. I think I was second on the waiting list, but there's always people that don't go. And then, yeah, I just remember, I kind of still remember the feeling now of being shown round on like one of those open days and just feeling like the girls, so it's a all girls school as well, which is like, I did not want to be in that environment. And they were quite like posh, basically, well to do, and a bit like snooty. And it made me feel quite insecure. And so I was like, oh, I really don't want to go to this school, da, da, da. But I was basically forced to. It was also like an hour and a half from my house. And so it was a real long journey with like 3 buses each way. But the bigger contextual thing here, I think, is that grammar schools basically started to help essentially like young people that wouldn't have the chance to otherwise get schooling, aka people from like disadvantaged backgrounds. And that's if you look at like the founding people of each of those schools, like that's generally what their founding like principle is. However, and this is definitely something that I found I took issue with, I think, from quite early on. I was like one of 3 people on free school meals, and the rest were like middle to upper class, like fairly well to do families that could afford private school. They wanted something akin to the private education, but they didn't want to pay. Instead, they poured their funds into tutoring their kids, getting like teachers from the school to tutor them, da 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 da, like using their privilege essentially to get in, which, yeah, I distinctly remember suggesting to the like deputy head we should have a quota for people from disadvantaged background. It should be at least a third. But yeah, the other thing is that I'm from one of 5 siblings, and we grew up with very little money. My mum was a widow. Money was extremely tight. There was 7 of us in a flat in a pretty sketchy bit of North London, one of the most deprived boroughs, actually. And so there was also this weird thing of, like, coming from a certain environment and my older siblings having gone to a local school, and then just the insane difference of me breaking that chain basically to go to a school that was basically full of privileged people, which had a profound effect on keeping me out of like fully falling out of the system. But it also meant that I was like the poor kid basically in a school full of, yeah, quite privileged families who are very strict. And I was the one that's always out partying, not doing homework.
I imagine it's like a double-edged sword, because do you feel like if you had not gone, this is obviously all hypothetical, right? It's going to be very difficult to just answer black and white. But if you were to hypothesize, do you think you'd be where you are if you went to a school that was similar to maybe your siblings?
Do you know what? It's so hard to say because I feel like I hated that school, but in a way it kept me off like being like, I mean, for example, I had a real like fucked up life a lot of the time. My attendance was down at like 30%. Um I had a like social worker for a bit, there was drugs and alcohol issues from like very early on. And so I guess being in an environment where the expectation was really high. I mean, like to give you an example of how it was different on the ground in a lot of schools, will kind of people take the piss out of you for studying, and like if you're a SWAT, if you're doing your homework, teacher's pet, blah blah, that like you're a loser. In my school, you were a loser if you weren't doing the homework and you weren't turning up and blah blah blah. So it was like the environment was so different that I always think if I'd gone through to a very like a bit of a rough state local school like some of my siblings did, a lot of them were having babies out of school, getting pregnant at 16, 17, 18. I had to seek out bad things. Like I had to seek out drugs, booze, blah, 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 those kind of people. And so, yeah, I do wonder all of the people in my kind of year, it's weird because I was there, but I didn't associate it with them. So for example, a lot of them went to Oxbridge, right? That was for me, I felt like it was never on the cards, even though I guess technically it was, but it kind of wasn't for an array of like nuanced reasons. My home life, parental support, ambition, blah, blah, blah. So, and they went on to do a lot of like academic stuff, scientists, doctors, and I just felt like that was never in my range. So in a way, like I benefited. And if I'd gone for a rough place and I was seeking out those bad behaviors, which I would have been, like who knows where I would have ended up. I don't. Yeah, it's hard to say, but it definitely kept me out of trouble because I was close to being kicked out of that school, and so yeah, I don't know. It's interesting to ponder.
It is. Like, and again, there'll be no answer. There's no definitive answer. It's just interesting because there's so many people that I speak to that have, let's say, been in the complete opposite schooling system and have had the similar effect for different reasons. So for myself, for example, I went to like a pretty rough school. There were numerous occasions that the police would turn up to the school because people would have knives and there'd be people waiting outside of the school with knives. There'd be people like pedos that come into the school because it was like so easy accessible and stuff like that. It was just bonkers. It was like bedlam. And so again, like safeguarding issues and the natural uncertainty for a lot of children just permanently that anybody could walk into the school. I detested my school and I had a really tumultuous schooling experience. I was very social. However, just could not wrap my head around the conformity with the educational system. And very early on, I knew that I was never going to go on to further education and then I was going to do whatever it was in my power to get into the world of entrepreneurship and have total autonomy and freedom of my life. Freedom and business were the two things that I knew from probably like year 8, 9 that
Wow. Yeah,
I
that's amazing.
wanted, but I had no understanding of how to obtain it or direct
Yeah.
or anything. And obviously you then tell the school that and you are then disregarded because it's like you're not feeding into the sixth form or the university.
Yeah, higher education and stuff. That's also something I had a big issue with. Again, I did end up going after a year deferred, but it's interesting. I was just thinking about what you were saying there, and like, I didn't know entrepreneurship really existed. Did I leave school feeling like I was capable, I could do anything? Absolutely not. I left school like very directionless. I actually felt incredibly inferior because of the way that school evaluates you academically based on these score results and can you do this, can you do that? And I was failing miserably at that. Like, I was getting U's on my papers, my practice papers, this and that and that. Like, I did manage to scrape through, but it was always because like it was at the last, 11th hour kind of thing. Like, she's going to fail, she's going to get kicked out, blah blah. So that I could pull through. But basically, it made me feel incredibly inadequate. Apart from a few moments with certain teachers where like I distinctly remember my deputy head saying, "You are one of the most intelligent girls in this school," or like, and that blew my mind because I was like, "How can I be failing academically?" But then also one of the brightest. So it was like there were some small moments, and that's how I always speak to people about like the impact you can have on a young person with one sentence is huge. But yeah, it left me feeling very mixed up and like completely directionless, to be honest. So I do still feel incredibly grateful based on the other experiences I could have had. Yeah, it didn't set me up in so many ways for the path that I went on. Basically, I didn't really feel capable until I went into the circles of entrepreneurship and started to pursue that. And that in itself is a journey.
And I think like, I won't speak for you. I know for me, because I felt similar for just different reasons. Having to then equip myself and go through that journey was the making of me, where I had to learn the hard way. And through a negative experience, I committed to never being in employment. And I have had a business since I was 17. And it was the case of like, it was just not an option because I detested the system or whatever so much. I was like, I have to figure out a way to do this on my own. So again, I'm very grateful for that experience because it was so bad that it created such an imprint on me that I refused to ever step back into something that at least could taste like that and remind me of that. Question I want to ask is, you just mentioned you weren't necessarily cognitively aware of what being an entrepreneur was, entrepreneurship, business. When did the word entrepreneur even enter your world?
I'm gonna say it was basically when I left uni, and it was like one of my like first, second, because I got bored in uni. I kind of like dropped out and started working again because I've been working throughout like a year between as well. But yeah, no, I was working in a small production company with literally me and the guy that owned the company and then one other assistant. That's when I discovered that you could be a business owner, and that was an option. So I guess I would have been like 21 at that time. And that really like my whole brain seems to be like shotgunned open at that point because I was like, oh my God. I think that's one thing that's been my superpower. I can see something and be like, well, I could do that. So like a little goes a long way for me. But for example, like we were making kind of corporate films, a lot of like internal recruitment type stuff for like big companies like, Accenture, NHS, etc. And I was like, oh my God, like this was like a eureka moment for me. I was like, this guy's making a really good kind of lifestyle business, making probably a couple of 100 grand a year. He's got like a little outgoing, but like he's setting his own times. He's like also like I'm doing cool things. That was the other thing that school like really didn't acknowledge at all, that you can make money and be really well paid by using creativity and being a creative person. That was very much shut out, like I think the traditional school system does. Because I was like, I'm casting actors, I'm like finding locations, I'm like looking at costumes and stuff, like, and I'm going onto like film sets. This is sick, and I could make money from it. So then I was all thinking of like, okay, well, we're spending money on X, we're spending money on casting extras, we're spending money on doing this, we're spending money on doing that. So like all of the brain just started ticking basically, and it was racing and having all these ideas. And yeah, it was shortly after that where I was like, this is an interesting one, right? Because I feel like there's small business owners, but the word entrepreneur for me, there's always been a distinction in my head to a degree of like people who are endlessly hungry to push the boundaries and push the limits. And that is not to say anything that puts down like smaller business owners, because even doing your own business, like the bravery, the nous, the like motivation that takes to break free of the mold of having a career and being an employee is insane. But basically my brain was hungry for more. I like wanted to see, I had bigger ideas that were out of what I was doing at the moment. And then I was like, what is out there? So yeah, it was within that time that I started to annoy shit out of my like colleagues. And actually I remember the other assistant saying, what, you really remind me of my cousin. He's always come up with ideas and never does any of them. And that was like really fucking like, that was the moment where I was like, I am not gonna be that. And then, yeah. And then I saw something in the newspaper that was like Founders of the Future event, blah, 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 by the Evening Standard. It just felt like serendipity. And I booked it there on the spot, and then like rest is history kind of thing.
Nice. I love that. And to your distinction between the business owner and the entrepreneur, I've spent quite a lot of time thinking about this as well, where again, both incredibly brave, both breaking free from the mold and deserve a ton of respect. And I'll always give respect to anybody that takes a bet on themselves. I think a business owner is somebody that has made a certain set of decisions and taken a certain set of bold actions that has now positioned them in a place of more autonomy. I think the distinction is that an entrepreneur is more of a identity and lifestyle that is ever present. Now that sounds a bit trite, right? Being an entrepreneur is a lifestyle. It's not a hobby. But I mean more so, it's like just this insatiable desire that almost can't be stopped to continue to expand, continue to self-evolve, continue to find new creative and innovative ways to solve problems or improve their or other people's lives. I would say, I think in the last 10 years, I've probably had 5 different types of businesses. I know that I will continue to make other solutions to other people's problems, thus creating businesses around them. But I don't feel like I have a choice. I feel like that is ingrained in me and hardwired into my brain to just do that on
Yeah.
autopilot. So to me, that
Right.
like I do own businesses and I am a small business owner. However, I personally, hence the podcast name, right? The ADHD entrepreneur, I associate more with the lifestyle that comes with being an entrepreneur, the identity that comes with it. Yeah. What about you? Which one do you associate with?
Yeah, I think it's the entrepreneur side, I guess. But yeah, I'm just very conscious of it sounding super wanky, basically. But yeah, it's like I would say that thing that I most resonated with what you said was like it's not a choice. Like once it's turned on, for better or for worse. And honestly, a lot of the time it can be for worse. Like right now, I'm in a period between like what's next, last business, blah blah. And I'm having a lot of conversations, and some of those conversations are like, well, why do you feel the need to jump into something big and broad and all consuming? Da, da? What you need is actually just something simple. Just to like tick things over, do something that you kind of enjoy at wheelhouse, good people, blah, blah, blah. But like almost inevitably, my brain will be like, what's this massive problem I want to solve that's going to be really hard? Yeah, I think it's that brain type that just constantly wants to be challenged. Like it's never enough. And it's also the battling of fear. Like I think if I think about all the hardest moments and getting through and those big milestones, it's always been like just being absolutely fucking sick of the fear in my own mind to get started or the fear to do something. And a lot of those early moments were doing something really simple and that being just like undoable, like registering the company at company's house, you know? That was something that was took me 3 months for the first business. It was that big in my head, you know, that £12 spend and the thing of doing something official. So I really did come from, I think that's one of the things also retrospectively in your 20s, you spend a lot of time looking back and understanding yourself, your childhood moments, your early year moments through the lens of like, oh, I'm like this because of that. I'm like that because of this. And so yeah, that's I think the journey that I personally went on from from a personal growth perspective, especially with that first business, was yeah, wow. I didn't even. I mean, the first step is uncovering that you're scared, right? Like you'll meet many people, and I was one of them at the early stages where, you know, there's just a million excuses to why you can't quite do something yet. You know, I've got to do this first, I've got to do that first. Well, I can't do this without that. Well, I've got this block. I da 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 da. And I remember actually it was one of the early people I met at that very first event, a guy called Mikey. And I was telling him about what would become Moohoo, my gin brand, my CBD brand. And I was saying, well, he was like, well, what? You know, you've been talking about for months. Why haven't you done this? Why haven't you kind of got started? And I was like, oh, because X, Y, Z and blah, blah, blah. And then he kind of paused and he looked at me and he was like, have you ever thought that it might just be because you're scared? And man, that hit straight into my like core brain because like so much of business just fucked, isn't it? Like so much of our lives we're just battling, we're at war with our own mind basically. And I think in different ways to different people. Like earlier, obviously, when I chat before, you were saying about how you know the thing for you is aim and fire. You can get going really easily. For me, it's like it's overthinking things and that makes things hard. But then I guess I'm maybe more structured going through it. But yeah, honestly, the battle within our minds is fucking awful. It's just terrible, isn't it? It makes life so hard. And even at the fact that my brain tries to hide things from you, it's like, oh, actually, if I just knew I was scared, I probably could have saved 6 months.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. It's, as I always say, it is the duality because I think, yes, we experience those challenging moments, the fact that the brain hides that from us and, you know, the inability to start and all of these seeming negatives. But I still wholeheartedly believe that the only reason we are in the conditions to be experiencing those negatives, i.e. building the business, like making these big risks, is because we also have the brain. There are people who don't have this brain that wouldn't even be in the arena.
Yeah. Yeah, 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 yeah.
So I think it's
Are the
like
kind of people that you meet, like, normal people, where they're like, "Why would you do that? Sounds really hard." And you're like, "Well, it sounds amazing." Like, "Yeah, but you don't know anything about that, Sally. You've never worked behind a bar before." Now you're like deep dive, like spitting stuff about like the structure of booze brands and how they're largely white labeled and this and that, and the structure of like how you can outsource and blah blah and blah 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 blah. And it's like, yeah, as you say, it's a compulsion. And I think like actually when I was checking out your podcast to figure out whether you're sound or not, I was listening to one of your experts say about like is a brain type that's like the one that goes into, you know, that's basically really good at adapting to new environments. And I think that's the brain type that this is. It's I need to go and find out what else is out there, you know, new territory, new land, new ways of doing things, new skills. And so our brains are just literally primed to be super attractive to things that feel, you know, my favorite thing is to throw myself into something I know absolutely nothing about. And yeah, that's really useful. But then in doing so, it's a massive journey of highs and lows.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why like I call it the hunter brain. So obviously this is called the ADHD entrepreneur, to be honest, more so from a messaging point of view, because there's too much education that's required on the hunter brain front up front. But any of like my clients that I work with from like a advisory and consultancy point of view know that we strictly call it the hunter brain. And again, like it just even just as a visual metaphor for so many of us, it just rubs our brain the right way in that we're always looking for greener pastures. We always want to be out on these hunts, heavily stimulating, heavily exciting, mentally arousing, highly dangerous, lots of uncertainty, lots of risks that have to be taken, could also be killed at any point.
Yeah.
So all of these factors, it's like, again, if I go out on a hunt, I want to eat the thing that I've killed today. Short feedback cycles, these dopamine cycles. Whereas we look
Yeah.
conversely, the farmers, they stay in the same pasture. They do the little frequent and often tasks, and they'll reap the benefit of that reward probably next year. So it's longer feedback cycles. They can do shorter input or long, steady inputs over long periods of time rather than these
Yeah.
high intensity bursts and then rest. So we'll hunt for 4 hours and then we've got the bison. It's like, sweet, let's just fucking chinwag for the next
Yeah.
4 hours. So
Things I've had people that think it's not good, like to have all this slight like I think the true dominance of the human race has been that insatiable dissatisfaction. And I distinctly remember someone I know saying, like, "Why aren't you just like unhappy? Because you're always slightly unsatisfied." And I'm like, "No, it doesn't feel bad. It feels good. It's like, how could this be better?" Like I'm proud. Like I think picky and fussy and blah 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 like are often framed as bad traits. But I think all entrepreneurs are really fussy and picky and like particular. And I think that's great because that's where you want to innovate. And that's where you can see the details of things that aren't quite right and tap into the nuances and then be like, let's innovate, let's change.
agreed. Because ultimately, like everything, if I look around my environment right now, none of this would exist if there wasn't people who had brains like ours. So this light to my left, like Edison clearly was dissatisfied with the fact that we have to use candles for light. So he failed 999 times to try and create a light bulb, let's say. And then on the thousandth time was like, oh, cool, like it works. So many factors there would not exist if he didn't have a brain type like this. One, the ability to spend more time in his default mode network that is obviously responsible for creativity and innovation to go, maybe there is another way that we can generate light. That's number one. Number two is failing and failing and failing and failing and failing over and over and over again and just brushing it off. And I think that is something for a number of different reasons, like time blindness, object permanence. But I think for most people with this brain type, we're able to just overcome challenges and adversity pretty quick. Like I've had many failures, many things that haven't gone the way that I wanted to, like, lost 20 grand on investments in a week, things like that, right? At a certain point, because I become hyperfixated on something else, it's as if it never happened. So there's so many factors that have been involved in all of the things that we have today that if we didn't have people who have a similar brain to us, where they're always looking for the equivalent of greener pastures or a new way of doing things, a more efficient way of doing things, where would we be? Is what I think.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
So with the gin company, walk me through what that was like when that idea first hit you. Because I know, I know what it's like when you have an idea that just completely consumes your brain. And I know you said that maybe it was a bit rogue at the time in the sense of didn't have necessarily any expertise or experience in there. So I'm curious on a couple of things. One, like, where did the idea come from? And what made you choose that? And two, that whole journey to unpacking the idea and eventually selling.
Mm. So just one simple, straightforward question there then. Uh, let's just summarize this. So, well, where did the idea come from? It was kind of a mix of a really cool experience I'd had when I was stuck out on a trip in Asia, and basically I was in like monsoon. I think it was Thailand. I think it was Thailand, and I was stuck on one of the islands, and basically there was monsoon rain for like I don't know 10 days or something significant. Yeah, basically I just was like bored. Only had I distinctly remember like I think the Wi-Fi wasn't working or wasn't there, and there was basically a TV full of like DVDs, so like very old school, and so very bored, and started essentially experimenting with like putting dragon fruit, local flavors, etc., and into like vodka essentially, or what you call like neutral grain spirit. Just leaving them for a few days and then seeing how that flavor would diffuse. So just basically messing around with booze, and then getting back and kind of going into that a little bit more. Experimenting with different flavors at home, making drinks and cocktails and mixed stuff for like friends, parties, things like that around uni. And that was kind of an early experience that would feed in because it was actually like pre knowing the entrepreneurship thing existed. And yeah, as you say, it's that all consumingness. So like at the time, I was still working as a production assistant actually. And I'd started to go to and connect with other kind of my tribe type people, other entrepreneurs doing interesting things. And I just I had all these kind of different ranges. The concept was like spirits, gin, vodka, with adaptogens. So basically I was thinking along the lines of when people drink, they often want like a Red Bull and Coke. They want something that has something a little bit more than just the booze, a little like added something. And so I was looking into all these interesting adaptogen things like yerba mate, things that had a kind of active ingredient that would do something more for you than just booze. And so, yeah, I was experimenting and looking into all these different things. I was playing around at home. But in the midst of this, I kind of, yeah, I'd had what I would call brain awakening one. And I've actually only ever spoken to someone about this like once, but I have like very set times. And I think the first one was around 23, where like it felt like my brain's processing had been turned up like tenfold. And I had like 2 or 3 points of that in my 20s, and like brain was like racing, processing, noticing details around me like it'd never been processing that before. So it was a real like unlocking moment. But yeah, I then was exploring. It wasn't my very first business idea, but I was looking at the CBD as like a range two actually original. It was going to be the second product, and it was around that time where I saw a bunch of articles, a bunch of chat going on about CBD. CBD is going to be like the article said CBD is going to be the next avocado on toast. It's huge. And then on the peripheries, I was hearing like my grandma's using CBD, my like brother's using CBD for like exercise recovery, for this, for sleep, for mental health. And I was like, holy shit, this is going to be huge. And then I kind of like ordered some oils. At the time, it was kind of like peppermint, orange oils, just like a lot of quite basic products, to be honest. And the idea kind of fully formed from seeing three main issues, basically. I was like, right, CBD is going to be huge, going to be global. That much, like, I was certain of. But products that were coming out at that time had three main issues. First of all, it was an oil, like an oil tincture thing that you drop on your tongue. Like, what is that? No one was doing that before CBD. So that was new. That was weird. Like, it was just not a common way to take kind of medication and stuff before that or whatever, supplements. Number two, they tasted really bad, really earthy, quite bitter, just like not very pleasant. And even though a lot of stuff is really good for you, people just don't really consume it that much unless it tastes good. Which is why those like protein, low fat ice creams and stuff do really well, because people want to be healthy, sure, but like most of all, they just want the pleasure seeking of like, this tastes really good. And then the third one was a stigma. So in the UK, I think there was a lot of stigma around like CBD. It's part of the cannabis plant. Is it psychoactive? People smoking weed, like stoners, like had a very negative for like lots of generations. So the stigma wasn't great. And I think like when you think about consumers, a lot of people design brands going like, this is for 20-something-year-olds, but your core consumer almost always ends up being people in their 40s, who young people think are so old that they won't appeal to young brands, but actually they have the spending power. And anyway, all the rest, but side point. So I thought, well, how can I solve this issue? And that's where the drinks thing came in. So I was like, if I put CBD into something that's already booming. So I worked back basically from the fact that I knew I had no money. and I was on like £10 an hour, and I had no experience as well. So I was like, I'd gone through some ideas for tech and blah blah blah, blah, and then I'd had a chat with someone. And they were like, "Yeah, I just need to raise £1 million and get a bunch of engineers." And that, like, given my background, scared the shit out of me. I was like, I'm not capable of that. So I came back, and often this is the process of finding out what you want to do, what you're good at, is what you don't want to do. And so I was like, right, I need something low risk, low financial need, and something physical. Because for me, the risk perception, and I find this really interesting actually, it's something that I've got on like my notes. When you grow up from a privileged background or background where people have, like, they've figured out some success, they can pass on some intel to you. Your perception, especially if you've got a big like financial safety net, and your parents will pay for your rent and blah blah. Your perception of risk is like that. Your perception of gain is like that. When you're from a background like my own upbringing, my perception of risk was fucking huge, and the upside was tiny because I'd never done it before. I didn't know really anyone that had been successful, and so that constant mental battle with my fear perception was huge. And so this risk thing of spending any money, even the little money I did have, that was incredibly terrifying. So yeah, I needed low input, and basically I was like, well, I'm gonna have no money to market it, but I have a sense that basically if I jump onto a trend like CBD, which is huge, booming, journalists are going to write about, are writing about it, everyone's talking about it, da, 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 then I combine it with something that people already love and buy, and journalists again are already writing about, which was gin, because we'd had a massive gin boom for about 5 years before that. And I make the gin brand cool, wacky, tropical, interesting story behind it. Again, very different from the gins that have been on the market, because at that point it was so saturated. And there was like every gin, every village, town, and city had a gin. There was Manchester gin, Brighton gin, this gin, like, and they were all, what I learned was called like provenance. So they're all based on like, oh, we're made here, our thing, our still, da da da. I wanted to create something that was like just different, basically, from start to finish. Weird name, weird look nothing like a gin, and then have this CBD in it. And I was like, if I can do that, then people will talk about it, they'll cover it, blah 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 blah, and then it will lead to like retailers wanting to buy it. And that was basically my whole business plan. um, but as you say, I was like, I got into a being so obsessed. I mean, I couldn't sleep. I was in a level of like obsession that, to be honest, I think was needed, but also quite unhealthy mental state to be in. Because then you're like that. You're really like that. And I didn't have any mentors. I wasn't surrounded by people who do. I had people on the peripheries, but yeah, that was very, very difficult. I guess I've probably got like slightly deep into the beginning bit, but yeah, the story as a whole, I had the idea in like December 2018. By 2019, September, so about 9 months later, I'd launched the gin, with much difficulty from a financial perspective and everything else, and loads of things going wrong. But a month later, based on the personal brand that I did, using templates, doing PR for myself, writing on LinkedIn, I had an acquisition offer 1 month later. And 5 months later, I had a seven-figure acquisition offer for literally a business that I not only started with, like, as a learning thing, basically for myself in my bedroom, but I'd only spent in total like a grand, which had been like £50 here, £200 there. So even now, looking back at my story and being in the house that I bought with that exit money, like, it's still a pinch me moment because it's so bizarre and rare. And yeah, like the psychological impact of having, like, going through that and being like, even not being able to give myself credit, which sounds so weird because I was the only employee, the only shelter, like I was the whole business. But yeah, no, it's obviously incredible, but so hard to process.
I can only imagine, because your interpretation of it was obviously going to be so unique because you're inside of the bottle, right? So your ability to read the label is always going to be distorted. Like, as somebody who's just like peering in with obviously very little knowledge, like, it's astounding. The ability to be able to recognize the constraints, whether they're psychological constraints of, right, I don't want to have large capital risk to begin with. I want it to be a physical product. So you're putting all these, which I believe when it comes to business is healthy, these healthy constraints in place that force you to then narrow your field of view and your decision-making process, which again, as a principle, is something that people with this brain type, I believe, need. Otherwise, too many options, nothing gets done. So that's really cool. Just seeing how your brain is, whether that's conscious or not, has gone through that. And then being the only stakeholder and shareholder and employee, and no outside investment, no outside input to a degree other than probably just like your network or anything like that. Launching a physical product and then selling for 7 figures at the age of 25 prior to actually experiencing the success of your own company, like in the marketplace, I think is incredible. And I can only imagine that after going through a period of what felt like just hustle, all consuming roller coaster of emotions throughout the build to then selling. That was probably a big transitionary moment for you, not only the actual physical change and like environment, day to day, that type of stuff, but also maybe the internal kind of psychological element of I'm financially free at such a young age. Like, I know for me, I'd probably be thinking, what do I do now for the rest of my life? What, again, another really straightforward, simple question for you to answer. But what was that like for you going through that moment of selling?
I mean, the moment of selling was honestly just, yeah, it was something that I couldn't believe. And to be honest, I didn't process for many weeks and months. I didn't shift my habits for a long time. Like I had to teach myself out of that poverty mindset that I've been living in. I mean, like when I was building the business, I mean, first of all, I want to say that like everything was new, scary, terrifying, and hard. So like a lot of the battle was in my head. But I mean, like I taught myself trademark law. I had a 4-hour interview by 2 HMRC officers in my rented flat. I got quizzed on my business plans. I get 2 special licenses that you need to both wholesale alcohol and hold alcohol in warehouses without paying the duty on it, which is basically the tax. I didn't know what an exit was a month before my exit. I only heard it from a friend that said, "Oh, I might have an exit on the table." I was like, "What's that?" So I didn't even know that that's where you were like going towards. I think it was a journey of like, I need to do this for me. Like I need to understand who I am and what I'm capable of. And so it was always like I was deep within it, but I wasn't, yeah, it was like a weird mix of not knowing where I was going, having wild ambition, yet none of the expertise or funds. I mean, my first acquisition offer, I said no, and it was like a couple of 100K, and it was a job, and it was a job as well for 60K, and I didn't really like the acquirer. But most of all, I was like, no, this is going to the moon, man. And like when I look back at that, I'm like, how? How? Because that was so much money, like from my upbringing. I mean, I still remember like being in those first rooms and meeting entrepreneurs, which by the way, who are, by the way, mostly silver spooners. So much. I mean, it's, I think it's starting to shift a bit now. But being in the room where I was like, oh, you know, what are you doing? Oh, I'm building this platform. Oh, how are you funding? Like, how much are you spending on that? Or how are you funding it? Oh, well, I just kind of raised 250 from family and friends. Finding out that 250 was 250,000 and the family and friends would just have this money, I was like, if I ask my mum, I might get 20 quid, but that's probably it. So going into this world, like everything was bizarre. Going to the first fundraise, because actually I wasn't looking for an acquisition. It came to me because of the way that I'd be able to tell my story and stuff, and then digesting, you know, why was I actually successful? What worked? And it was all about making noise, of being vulnerable and sharing my stuff. But just before that, so at the end of 2019, I'd basically I'd run out of money, I burnt out, I couldn't pay my rent. I was living extremely frugally, by the way, so I wouldn't like buy anything out. If I had to buy food out, for example, when I was traipsing around London with a really heavy backpack that was probably like 20, 30 kilos, sometimes up to 12 hours a day, going to bar to bar to bar, restaurant to restaurant, managing online orders as well, managing this and managing that and social media, because obviously I didn't know about having a strategy where you like, I kind of did, but I didn't know how to do it because I hadn't had any experience before of like, oh, you just need to focus on the on trade, which is bars and restaurants, or you just need to focus on D2C. So I was trying to also do it all. I was burning out. I wasn't kind of earning any money. Like the money just went straight back into production. And so, yeah, but come December, a couple of months after, I said no to that acquisition and investment offer because somehow smart me.
Before we
But
move
yeah, no,
on, with that first acquisition offer,
yeah.
were you tempted? Was there a moment where you were like, "Oh, should I?"
No, not really, because it actually wasn't about the money. It was about the character of the person. It's a very weird experience, actually. But it was what I would describe as it was quite a big guy, pinstripe suit, the kind that would go to like stripper. Like I got the vibe of like someone that go out to strip clubs in the afternoon. He was like ex Russian tobacco, and I was like, no, this is not for me. I was like, I don't want to be an employee. It's like, so yeah, there was a mixture of weird things. But yeah, anyway, I went out to thing and I was like, well, I need to fundraise. How do I fundraise? What does that look like? I remember having these first conversations with a lot of entrepreneurs where I was like, so how do I value the business? They were like, well, you don't want to give away too much equity, just so minimum you're looking at like a mil valuation. And that to me was like so fucking hilarious. So I had to like look in the mirror and be like, this business is worth 1 million, this business is worth like da 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 da. And like honestly, just like having to like psych myself up into like speaking like these super successful entrepreneurs was like in itself like a bizarre thing that again I had to emulate and like become like talking like that and acting like that as if, yeah, you know, the front, the kind of thing to make it. Anyway, so yeah, went to raise money, had loads of angels came to me, but then they asked basic questions like, how are you going to spend the money? So I decided to raise 150K because that was the kind of tax relief amount that basically investors can get 50% back through their income tax. So it makes it super easy to invest relatively. So I was like, right, how much to raise? Well, I'll raise the max of that, so 150K, and then go out on this valuation because, of course, you want to retain as much equity as possible. But yeah, they were asking simple questions like, how will you spend that 150K? And I was like, stock, marketing. I need to find out that people have like these like detailed pie charts of like, here's the distribution, phase one, blah blah. Here's the board, da da da. So anyway, all of it was just a massive learning curve. When I actually sold, when I had the second acquisition offer, they came to me for it as an investment thing, and it was a company from the US. And later on, they were like, "We're really impressed by you, your knowledge in this space, da da da, your ambition, and actually the resourcefulness." I hadn't realized was a superpower, because everyone around me, generally with entrepreneurs, is like, I raised 3 million quid and then I paid people to figure out stuff, whereas I'd done everything on like a nothing budget, and I'd gone on the map, I'd done big things, I'd had pre-orders, never run an ad, zero spend on marketing. And so, yeah, later that day, met with these American guys. I distinctly remember it was like near Oxford Circus. It was like Mayfair or something. And it was a round table boardroom. And there was like 8 people. And there was some UK sourcer people who were like looking for CBD businesses essentially to invest in. There was the US private equity guys. And yeah, we just kind of had like quite a casual chat, to be honest. Talked about the brand, talked about the way that CBD acts on the brain. And just like, obviously, I'd gone deep dive on it. So I knew a lot. The regulation, the people in the market, da, da, da. And then later on, I got a term sheet, and that term sheet's basically like, we want to invest at X valuation and blah, blah, blah. And it was for a complete purchase. So it was 100% of the shares, not what I was expecting. And my initial reaction again was no, for, to be honest, a variety of reasons. And second of all, like the offer seemed too good to be true, because it was like double what I was raising on. So I was like, this can't be serious. And that, by the way, was just as I was 2 weeks from COVID hitting. 9 months, what was it? 6 months of due diligence, which is basically where they like strip your business inside out. They look at every contract, every email you've ever sent, and blah, 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 blah. And yeah, that September, it closed. And it closed, meaning that you get typically, just because I'm always conscious of, I know this stuff, but other people don't know this stuff. So typically when your business gets acquired, there's 2 factors. A, the payments. So are the payments purely in cash? Are they in cash or are they in shares? So often it's quite common to have a split of, I don't know, 60-40, 50-50, where half your payments in cash. And then a lot of that cash is like basically set up so that if the business continues to run well and grow, then you'll get payment 2, and you'll get payment 3. And there's bonuses and things that incentivize the entrepreneur not to be like, bye. And so you always get an amount on day 1, and then there's usually a payment schedule. Mine wasn't actually at all linked to the performance of the business. It was just like cash timelines. And then you also have to get shares of the company that's acquiring you, which, say, if Apple is buying your company, is pretty safe and good. And you can just assume those are going to go up and up generally. If it's a smaller unknown company, then kind of just, I was like, well, it's probably not going to be worth anything. But if it is, it's a bonus. We're not going to really kind of consider it. And then you have what you call an earn out period. So when if I'm buying your business, and a lot of that intel, the structural running, the ideas is on you. It's like Jack has all that in his head. He has the contacts, has the relationship. So I kind of need to retain you for a couple of years, basically, which is called the earn out period. And yeah, I'm less explaining this to you, but I'm just thinking of viewers and people coming in and thinking about this. So yeah, that can be typically up to 4 years. Mine was a year and a half. But yeah, I guess I'm intellectualizing this bit because those 6 months between, I think I have a deal. And I've also, by the way, it's COVID. So I've lost my business, all my business, all of the deals I worked hard to get with restaurants and bars and blah, 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 those are gone. Online sales were booming. But basically I was like, I'm either going to come out of this in a position I could never, ever dream of ever getting to, let alone getting to at 25, or I'm going to be a failure and my first business has failed. And I would have taken that so personally and deeply. I honestly don't even know whether I would have come back from that, which was, it was a bit of a mind fuck. I was like stopping myself, but also sometimes looking at Rightmove, being like, if I sold, where would I live? What was the house that I would buy and stuff? And so I tried not to do that because I knew it would just psychologically destroy me if I got in the mindset it was happening. But yeah, here and there it would happen. Anyway, I'm going to pause there because I've spoken for a long time.
That's super interesting. What took you from that place of initially turning or saying no to that first offer? Not first offer, the second offer.
Yeah, it was a kind of an advisor basically who was like, I told a few people and I was like, what do you think of this? And one of them was like, I was like, I don't think I'm going to go for it. And one of them was like, sure, like just go through it and explore, because worst comes to worst, it doesn't happen, but so what? You kind of don't have that much to lose, to be honest. And I was like, fine, I'll explore it just in case.
Nice. I love that. And now I'm really curious. Post selling, obviously, you've got that buyout period of a year and a half where you, it's a handover period essentially, isn't it? You're helping them to learn the infrastructure for your brain, take over your brain, make you no longer needed within the company. So it may not have actually been immediate, like
Mm.
the stark difference, because you still were associated with the business. But was there a point of which where it was like, maybe it was post the year and a half where you had completely cut ties with it, where it was like, you're sat in a room maybe and it's like, wow, this is what do I do now?
Yeah, it was a weird journey. So like, I mean, first of all, I think the fact that I had all this money in my bank account overnight, like I still remember the lawyers, they confirmed on a Friday that the deal would close. Be like exchanging, like buying a house. You kind of close, you have exchange and then you have a deal where the money's actually handed over. And honestly, I couldn't process I couldn't process that for so long. Like I couldn't spend any additional money. I remember the first thing I ended up spending money on was like taxis. And I don't think I'd ever paid for a taxi on my own unless it was like a student share going to a whatever club or something and like a couple of quid. I never paid for a taxi. And to me, having grown up poor, like the definition of wealth was like someone just rolling out of a train station and just jumping in a black cab. So I started taking taxis everywhere, and like I felt like forced, like I had to enjoy and become the person with the money. Like it's a weird thing. Like you feel like you need to, but you're not naturally going to go and do that. Um, but yeah, so I started taking taxis everywhere, and that felt really fancy and cool. But then I realized that I kind of missed walking and I really like walking, so I went back. So there was this weird of playfulness of identity. And I had people say, you know, you need to spend £10,000 on yourself so your body and mind knows what success feels like and all of those kind of things. But the weird thing was with the earnout period is that, okay, first of all, it was all remote because it was COVID and things were stop start and blah, blah, blah. And actually, I ended up being pulled in and working across lots of different brands that they had, new brands coming in, new product development, etc. But it was all remote, and there was a lot of stop starts. We were doing one thing, then we were pulled onto other projects, and there was a slight disconnect as well between the UK team and the US team. Like we would go through a process of come out with a concept, for example, making Moohoo into a hard seltzer or a non-alc. And then there was just this weird thing of basically we would come up with the whole project, the launch, the market launch, long presentations. I think it was my first experience of like a corporate organization as well. And I didn't like it at all. It was like process for the sake of process. Like, let's make a PowerPoint in that. Like, well, you have to work back from a budget, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, this is all just theoretical bullshit. Anyway, so we do this long thing for like 3, 4 months and then we'd send it off to the US. And a lot of the time, there just wasn't any like funding that came out. And then we'd just be like, and then actually the direction would change. So it was quite discombobulated. But the thing I remember most is like, I just went completely dead on LinkedIn. So from having documented my journey quite like vulnerably and just like stream of consciousness, I went quiet. And actually a lot of people thought that the business had failed. And it was weird. I wanted to tell everyone. And I told people in my like close circles that I'd exited and da da da. But yeah, no, I couldn't announce it publicly, which felt very strange to me. So I just didn't know what to say because I couldn't say I was in and out period either. So I just went quiet. Yeah, that was odd. I think looking back, it was quite dysfunctional. But honestly, any exited entrepreneur will usually tell you that going from being a lone wolf who deliberately doesn't want to be an employee to an employee, usually of a larger company with all these processes and corporate stuff, is not ideal. So it's weird because most entrepreneurs want to exit, and that's their thing. I want to exit, but obviously by exiting, you become an employee for most people. So it's like a weird paradigm that doesn't quite make sense.
I can imagine as well that that's probably like anticlimactic to a degree where, as you say, you've, especially with the brain type that we have, right? We have that yearning for independence and autonomy and not playing things by the book and not having as many processes as we should and just fucking going for it, right? And then you sell and that's kind of like, oh, there's gonna be fireworks, everybody, like it's gonna be celebrations, it's this big I've arrived moment. And then we end up in the conditions that you've actually tried to avoid your whole life.
Yeah.
Like, did that taint any of the experience for you?
I think it was more, I mean, to be fair, yeah, there's lots of like functional thing. So in a way, like I was on a really good salary and actually came to kind of actually appreciate that. Especially since, it's weird to think, like, I just thought rich people bought everything in cash. So I was like, "Oh, you wouldn't have a mortgage," and, like, I don't know, basic things where I, like, asked someone, like, "Where do you, like, keep your cash? Like, what bank do you use?" They're like, "All of them." There's, like, a limit on your protection, which is, like, 90 grand or whatever, and so they just feel so there's always weird things, but, like, I ended up getting a mortgage because someone was like, "No, no, you don't put all your cash into your asset. You still borrow like a normal person." So obviously without the income, I couldn't have borrowed and blah, blah, blah. And that makes much more sense. And then you can invest and blah, blah. But to be honest, yeah, the big thing was not being able to like announce it, especially since for me, having gone on such a journey, probably quite low self esteem, to be honest, of being lost and not knowing my value. For me, it wasn't just I've arrived, I've done this big thing. It was like I'm worthy. Like I've like beaten the odds, like I'm a solo founder. I grew up in free school meals. I never had any network contacts, anything. No one, like, not even a mentor telling me like this and that and that. And I like managed to do the INT ball. So like, I was desperate to tell that story and feel worthy and have all that status, I guess, that being an extra entrepreneur gives you. But I couldn't. So yeah, it was honestly just like a weird period. And the other thing is I couldn't get started with the next thing, which was my instinct. I was like, right, what's next? I want to go into something else. I was kind of having the ideas, but I was like, I can't do anything with them because I was so dependent on building in public to a degree. And like that's what had worked really well for me is talking about my journey, and then I'd find contacts and people would reach out. And I kind of didn't know, and still to this day struggle a little bit with not doing that. But yeah, especially early on when my network was everything that I kind of built.
Yep, makes total sense. Now, if we fast forward to present day, what have you learned from that point to where you are now? Because how long ago was that, the sale?
So I finished the whole process, including like the earn out bit. That would be in 2020. So yeah, a good like 3-4 years, 3.5 years, but coming up to now. Obviously a bit happened in between. I think there's this thing of you've exited and everyone's like, oh, what's next? What's next? I try to also enjoy it a little bit and like not go, because I think as entrepreneurs, we're always like, if I could just get to this dream milestone, like that would be it for me. And then you get there, you're like, what's next? What's bigger? I didn't stop having, I mean, I did stop having that hunger a little bit actually, which scared me because obviously like for me, the financial drive to this freedom, this place of like, I don't have to ask for time off. I just like, I'm not, I could take 6 months out to build something and I don't need to have a salary. That was weird because that had been a massive driver of me, like dreaming of this infinite, like unicorn heaven world where like all my problems would go away, which I think is like kind of what people think about with money. Only when you're on the other side, you realize that actually a lot of your problems, apart from the fact that your time and control of your time aren't actually money related. And there's that annoying thing of people like money doesn't make you happy, blah, blah. And I think you just actually have to go through it to understand that. But it does give you a lot of fucking love, happiness, a lot of freedom, and a lot of reduced stress. But yeah, everyone's like, what's next? What's next? What's next? But to be honest, I was a bit traumatized, I think, for my first business because I was a solo founder. I had really dark moments. I had like several breakdowns. It really impacted some of my relationships. But yeah, it was just very isolating being on my own. So I was like convinced I needed to go into it with the team and da da da. So I had a couple of false starts, and also my ideas were really big. I wanted to launch a menopause business and highly regulated healthcare stuff, or some sort of really big social media platform. And so I kept going through that thing of having loads of chats, but like I just didn't feel like I had the right team around me, and has a couple of false starts. I also partnered with someone on a course that I created, which was like teaching businesses owners how to do their own PR, since that had been like, and I still preach it today, being seen to be doing what you're doing is more important than doing the thing itself. Because when you're being seen, but building in public, I suppose you call it now, people reach out, they want to be involved, they want to give their time, they want to invest in you, like it always inbound. Whereas if you don't have that personal brand and people aren't seeing or hearing you, then it's outbound, which is just really, really hard. And it's always hit and miss. You have to, reach out to 100 people to go get a few replies. Whereas up in the personal brand thing, where you're like a person, you're out there, people admire it and they want to be involved. So it helps a massive amount. So I went through that, but I partnered with a consultancy, two sort of like grey hair entrepreneurs who were like, oh, we have 30,000 business owners on our books and da 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 da. They were like, so that was a bit of a JV. I was like, well, I'll bring all the talent and create the course and da da da. They were like, we'll bring all the sales. And then of course, Like, I created everything and they basically made no sales. And so I was like, oh, okay, like this sucks, but also I don't want to be alone again. So I ran like one of those. It was really successful. But like psychologically, I just wasn't in it because I was still searching for this remedy to the isolation of my previous business. So that went on pause. That was called Paper Round. Um, and then a couple of false starts, to be honest, before my recent business, which was a tech platform helping young people figure out careers, which is kind of links back to my social mobility um, drive. I mean, like having been in growing up in an area where I have very little in the way of positive role models. I mean, people around me were kind of either in dead end jobs. A lot of them were working kind of more physical jobs like electrician, plumber. What was there anything wrong with that? But the concept of like, see, corporate careers, you know, the fact that you could earn 6 figures and beyond and 7 figures in a career, or you could be an entrepreneur, like that's not what I grew up with. And the amount of intel that I realized was being passed down from like middle class families, like, oh, I've gone on to be an engineer and I've earned 250 grand a year. So if you study, son, and do this, or daughter, then you can get this. And by the way, my friend, the nice wealthy area we live in, we're having a barbecue, or like the neighbor can set you up with an internship at his fancy company and blah, blah, blah. And so I've always had, and still to this day, you have this massive drive for like leveling the playing field. Yeah, first tech business, always wanted to be in tech, by the way, was my first idea. And that was the one where it was like, raise £1 million, blah, 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 blah. So that came along when a friend of mine, we were working on a little food side quest project. And basically, yeah, it was a similar idea. Actually, it wasn't an idea. It was just like, we want to level the playing field, blah, blah, blah. And so I was like, great. I've got like team, I've got purpose, and it's tech. Count me in. So that was the last 2 years of my journey. And I've just stepped away from that business actually. I had a lot of wins, you know, cracked organic user acquisition. I got on TikTok, which was a deep fear of mine, being on video. Drove about 7,000 users organically through to the platform, got really involved, and also just like learned a whole new thing, right? Which is like where my skills fit into tech, which is actually still back to the people thing, because tech without a deep understanding of what people need, what they fear, who they are, how they think, what are the unlockers for them, is basically pointless tech. And it's very expensive to build. So yeah, went on a really interesting journey with that. But you know, like lots of tech businesses and businesses in the UK in general, fundraising was difficult. Yeah, I think ultimately, without saying too much, I discovered that being on your own as a solo founder is hard, and having co-founders that you don't align with is harder and can be very soul destroying. So I think there was like some energy that was operating in the business amongst certain dynamics that, to be honest, looking back, was, yeah, absolutely destroyed me inside and out.
Which speaks to something that I'm keen to talk to you about, because I've experienced for different reasons the importance of this. And you referenced an episode that you'd listened to of mine with, I believe it may have been Dr. Annie Swanepoel, where we were talking about environmental mismatch, etc. So I'm curious, as I'm sure this is something throughout your whole entrepreneurial journey that you've pondered on, how important is environment for people who have this brain type? What kind of an impact does it have being in the wrong and conversely in the right environment?
It can be extremely psychologically damaging or uplifting. I mean, it's your environment. Almost, if you think about like your environment growing up, right, the family home, the impacts of, you know, the way that your parents parented, their emotional regulation, whether you're being bullied or not, like that is your whole world. And when you're operating in a company, it's a good part of your life. You know, spend a third of our hours at least working. And so it's very interesting because the psychological impact on you is prolonged and gradual. And actually, when I was talking to friends and family about this, I said it's a bit like, let's just say like a close friend, or let's just say your partner, or whatever, is like losing weight, right? You might notice they've lost a bit of weight. It's actually when you go and see someone completely on the outside that hasn't seen them in a year, they're like, oh my God, wow, you've lost so much weight. But actually, as someone that's close to it, you know they have, but you just don't know how drastic it is. And I think for me, yeah, there's two sides of it. It's like lots of subtle things, you know, like being left out of stuff, good ideas being blocked, achievements being minimized. And I literally, especially from my background, I pride myself, and I've always prided myself to be like, I'm tough, I'm resilient, I'll grit my teeth and I will like bear down and I will just do the work and I'll get there. I'll never give up. And it was that very like mindset, which is great, that just caused me to just carry on and carry on, carry on. And it wasn't until, again, I changed that environment, or I saw someone that was on the outside. I went into a different team. And I was like, holy shit. Like it was took that to see how damaging it had really been, even though there was really obvious things like I'd had a mental health breakdown. I started to question myself. There was like a lot of paranoia. Like there was just weird psychological dynamics, but all of them I was just like, I'm just going to get on with it, going to do my thing, blah blah blah, not realizing how much of an impact it had. When I went into another team, I was like, oh my god, everyone's like laughing on the calls. My confidence has got like that. My creativity is like that. I'm taking on new tasks of things I've never ddone before. Like I'm hiring people, I'm doing this and blah blah. I'm like, wow, I can just do all this stuff. But actually, I'd realized that over the course of 2 years, especially in the last year, I had just gone into the harder side of my existence, which was like the overthinking, analysis paralysis. I just like lost like a lot of like who I was essentially. And I find this fascinating. So that's like one of the most valuable things I know will set me up in my like 30s, so over the next decade, and then like and beyond, which is like, don't work with dickheads. Because even if you can get, even if you can carry on going and you're really resilient, in fact, that's the worst thing you can do. Because the impact is so profound. And the worst thing is, there's certain things that happen that are bad that are like widely understood. Um, like, I don't know, like violence, right? Like someone's punched me in the face or whatever, like that's bad, obviously, but it's very obvious that's bad. And everyone's like, oh my God, that's so bad. When you go to describe a psychological dynamic that slowly erodes your brain and your confidence, your creativity, and your soul, all of the things generally are small things, right? And they're subtle. And so it makes you almost question yourself. And I have a lot of discussions, coming out of this business where like I've had spoken to people that were like, oh yeah, what had me questioning, is this me or is this, the environment, the person, da, da, da. And they would like sense check. And that's what I found myself doing, like sense checking with family, friends, like, is this okay? This isn't normal, right? And yeah, that's what it can do to you. But when you look at the things like the subtlety, the language, the decisions, the blah blah, none of them feel that big. And so you almost feel like you are fake, wrong, you over question it, you analyze it, etc., which almost makes it harder for people to express because they feel like they're talking about nothing.
Yep. Like you say, there's often it is simpler for there to be a big glaringly obvious physical thing that everybody can objectively point at. But like it's that this singular event happened, which is wrong, and thus consequences need to be made. But it's like the death by 1,000 cuts, the micro bruises, the whatever they were, if it's like underhand remarks or the niggling kind of seeds of self-doubt that have been planted, that often it drives like a feeling from us, doesn't it? And that feeling then is like uncertainty, and like self-doubt starts to creep in, and that's in the best of times very difficult to articulate, because again it's a feeling that has been caused by lots of micro moments, but you can't point at just a singular one and say that that's the one that's impacted me, because they
It
have
would be
all.
so much easier if there was a score, right? And you're like, well, I did the thing. And this is literally what I did. I went into GBT and I created like a framework. So I was like, if I could just show someone that I'm in the score of 0 to 50, which is like, get out, this is really damaging, blah, 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 then it's just easier to convey that. It's easier to have, it's a bit like grief, right? Like when I realized, oh, like, I need to step away from this business, da, 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 da. I went through like a big period of grief. And again, like grief and loss, you think someone's died, right? Because that's the most material, most obvious, most visible and tangible way of people experiencing loss. But actually, like I came to realize that I was going through a lot of those same emotions, similar emotions, well, same emotions, probably to less intensity. But it is that concept of like different stages, and saying it is a death in a sense, because you're saying goodbye to a vision of who you thought you were and where you would go and how this would change your life and the impact you would have. You're stepping away from that version of yourself, which, especially if you've got like a high processing ADHD like brain like me, like I'm living 1,000 years in the future, like if I know I'm gonna do, it's weird to explain, but if I know I'm like going to the zoo this Sunday, then that's kind of already happened to my head. And then I've almost enjoyed the enjoyment time afterwards. And it's weird. It's like I'm living the future so much that I find change very difficult, basically. Um, and yeah, to be honest, like, it's left me, I know it's the right thing, and I know, like, this is gonna be, but it's a weird transitional period, you know? Like, I felt like I'm literally out at sea. Of course, again, my identity was so heavily tied in, less so this time. Um, but I'm like, "Oh, yeah, you just don't know what you quite wanna do with yourself." And so, I have good days where I'm like, "This is great. I can finally do all the things I wanna do and blah, blah, blah." Then on the other hand, I'm like, "Who am I? Where am I going? What is life?" So it really does, it messes. But I think again, even people were like, there's a transition time and you almost maybe need to sit with it, whereas the impulse is like throw myself into the next big thing. Because if I don't have a purpose and a driver, like that's where I feel alive. It's also where I feel the most pressured and stressed, but it's also like the zest of life for me, like it's lifeblood. And so yeah, it's very difficult. It's very difficult.
Before we bring this to a close and I ask you some quick fire questions, I'm curious with this place that you're at, one of many big major transitions and chapters, we can call it, of your life that's about to open that you maybe don't know what is going to be written on that page. What is helping you right now to navigate these decisions and almost used as this internal compass as to what this next chapter is going to be?
Mm. Yeah, I've done a lot of soul searching. I think the problem for me, as you alluded to earlier, is like I could do anything, right? Because I have a lot of core skills which would be useful in any business in any sector. I'm trying to go back to like what I'm really good at, what I enjoy, that kind of ikigai thing. I can't remember exactly, but it's kind of like what you need, or well, what you're good at, what you enjoy, what the world needs, and probably something else. And how am I actually doing it? I mean, I'm having days, I'm having lots of conversations with other entrepreneurs and finding out what they're up to and thinking about also what I feel the world needs at the moment. Like I'm very intuitive. And I think at the time, CBD was the huge thing, right? And now it's AI. And I'm thinking like, how do I bring my way to distill down complex things and overwhelm and noise and present things really like simply in a way that people can understand and feel safe with and bring that trust? Is there something I can do with that, with my kind of journalistic curiosity? How I can simplify trust, reduce overwhelm for people, and like make the world a better place. But yeah, like I'm not particularly good at it. Like I've had a lot of days where I'm having conversations and I'm feeling really energized and clear. But then my mind is like going off on all these tangents and it feels heavy. And then I'll come out of other conversations and just feel totally lost and overwhelmed. And there's all these narratives in my head that like, okay, I don't, it's that again, it's that psychological and emotional battle where you're like, my feelings aren't always guiding me in the right place as well. Like I might not want to do something, but actually why? Is it because it's hard? It's because it's complicated? It's because I have more questions than answers? Is it because I know nothing about it? Like there's so many layers of internal dialogue that I'm struggling with. And honestly, that can feel so overwhelming. And I think we spoke about this earlier because I think people see the next level up of success and beyond. And they think these people will just, I don't know, they've become 2D people who are just like, I've done it, I'll do it again. That's just not what happens. Like you do get a certain like additional confidence and so on and so forth. But maybe if I was like going into an industry I'd already done, but like that's like I'm never going to do that because I just like to go far and wide. And so yeah, that vulnerability, the overthinking, the like, am I good enough? Can I do this? The overwhelm, it's all there. It's all there, especially when you're coming out from one thing to another and you haven't quite got the path and the things are infinite. And so, yeah, it's gonna be, it feels uncomfortable basically, and I don't like sitting with discomfort.
But e-
Or
e-
just have, I'd love to have the next thing lined up, but I'm not, you know, I'm taking a month out, you know, that would be really easy. That would be much better.
But equally, I'm sure whether you feel it or not right now, I would imagine there'd be an undertone of excitement for the possibilities, and maybe even just like because you don't know, and like it's like
Mm,
element of angst and excitement, and nervousness and excitement, and how they are experienced the same in the body as well, right? Where it's like they can both be internalized or intellectualized as similar things. And I think that's also what at least I rationalize for myself when I go through similar periods is like you don't know at the moment, getting to know you today and also the previous conversations that we had, I believe that you are obviously going to figure it out, but
mm,
there's not many people that will. There's not like people will experience what we're experiencing now, the overwhelm, the abundance of options and decisions, the more questions than answers, and the paralysis that can come with that. And I don't think most people will have what it takes to push through all of that and continue to walk through that discomfort and walk through that fire. And that's what makes great opportunities. That's what makes great leaders, great people, great innovators, great thinkers, is accepting that that's what's present, but doing the thing anyway, and having
Mm,
the capacity and the resilience, like you spoke to, of being like, cool, I'm aware that I feel this way, but that isn't going to stop me and I'm going to figure it out.
mm. And my heart bleeds for those people because I am one of them. Like, I think we think of like, oh, there's this pot of people and there's that pot of people. No, you can always transition from one and the other. Like, I was the person that wouldn't take up introductions because I didn't have my pitch deck ready. It wasn't ready, and then it got too late, and then I couldn't reply, and blah, blah, blah. And like, I know that I've spoken to so many people where they've had a conversation with me and they've gone away and they've overthunk and they've got like deep down and perfectionist and like details and they've probably never started. But like, there is always time. You can always start. Like, it's never too late. And like, I'm still going through periods where I'm struggling to start. And I think one of the things I always come back to is, which I'm not very good at implementing a lot of the time, but it's that don't think, just do. So rather than like all these grand ideas, because I will go on a journey of like, this connects to that, connects to that, connects to that, connects to that outcome, and then this will happen, which is really useful in many ways, but also really terrible because there's so much you will never learn more than learning from doing. And so one of the things that I'm focusing on the short term is like, okay, what can I focus on that's specific that I can do maybe to conquer some of my fears or help people. I always like helping people, and I think good karma always comes and good opportunities. Like, there's people I've helped years ago. Like, I spoke to an engineer 2.5 years ago who's like, I'm in a company and doing this and bored. I really want to be in entrepreneurship. Gave him some advice, probably wasn't that helpful. 2.5 years later, he's come back with a platform and was like, would you like to co-found this? I'm looking for someone to be the face and do all the kind of go to market, the launch, the marketing, etc. And so the experiments thing, I'm terrified of public speaking, so I'm booking myself onto a public speaking thing. Um, I'm gonna try and get back onto TikTok and like just do like, I don't know, a challenge of like 3 pieces of content every day. And I think if you just look at the things you can do and just try so hard not to worry about like where they're going, because that just stops me from starting. That's the thing, that there's something about like, you don't have confidence. Confidence comes from the doing bit. And like, you don't need, no one's ready, right? No one goes into anything ready. It's going into being like, my feelings and the sickness in the pit of my stomach is irrelevant to the actions I can complete, and I just have to do them and try to do them despite knowing that I don't feel ready, because you'll never feel ready.
Undoubtedly. I made a piece of content. I think it was actually an episode around this the other day, in that we get it twisted and we think that there has to be feelings that are present and they precede the action. And what we do is we essentially just create this bind, this internal contract with ourselves, that these conditions have to be present in order for me to do the thing. And these conditions will never be present because the conditions are bred off the back of you doing the action.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's why so many people, like old versions of myself, are what I call like circular entrepreneurs, where they just keep going around and around that. They seek out information, they get a piece of information, they get to a certain level of certainty, and then they get the shiny object, or they find another idea, or the uncertainty kicks in again, and then they think the answer is in the next idea, the next conversation, and the next podcast, the next book. And all the while, they're expending a tremendous amount of energy, mental effort, and they're staying in the same position.
Yeah.
And that is when there is that lack of execution. It's just obsessing about the doing as opposed to the conditions that have
Yeah,
to be.
it's about where it will go for me. It's like, what will this mean? How will it feed into this bigger thing? It's like, you don't need to know. Uh, Design little experiments for yourself, whether it's like, I was working, so I also do the consulting and kind of work with people, especially, well, I do personal brand stuff, so the ghostwriting and the PR and blah, 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 and the launches. But as part of that, I do a really long and just like discovery process, or sit on calls for like a couple of hours, or like 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours in the separate sessions. And then I'll truly understand like what that person is at and what their transitional period is, what they want to do, da, da, da. And then usually, actually, I build content from that. So then I will write them 3 posts a week for 2 months for their LinkedIn, which will be really raw and their voice and the things they actually care about. And I'll help them give them that voice. But actually, on the most recent one, it was more like, how do I want to spend my next 5 years? And so it was like a deep psychological drive on like who they are, their triggers, some behaviors, the things that they found the most challenging. Then it was like, okay, what's next? And there will be like a bit of content and like a profile revamp. But actually, I end up designing 6 experiments that lent into, because people are rarely ready to be like, I'm a nurse, I'm going to jump into sales, I'm just going to quit my job. I mean, most people can't even do that. So designing little mini experiments, which are like self-contained. For example, a big thing for him is like fatherhood, right? And so I've designed 6 experiments: fatherhood and expression, likes being on stage, likes the psychological kind of analysis around people, behaviors, environments. And so I'm like, right, okay, loves doing this, loves expression, has always been interested in the arts, but never been able to pursue it. It's been in corporate. So 6 experiments, which are like a research project, a deep dive essay into bar. Um, 3 episodes of podcast, one with his daughter, because I think fatherhood's been a massive transitional thing for him. One with another dad, because again, he was talking about how, dads are going through similar things with their daughters, but they don't talk about it. One way it's a self-reflection piece. And like, that's just internal for now. Might use it in the future, but for now it's just for you. Developing a talk and then doing it with your most 5 closest friends, like little things like that. And like that's the only way I think you can go forward, is just doing little bits like that are self-contained, but you're just forcing yourself not to go into the future. And the path just emerges. Like it's just how it happens.
Yeah, and I like the fact that with those experiments, you're likely gaining evidence and disproving any of those mental barriers or blockages that stop us from committing to the thing in the first place. It's this safe environment that you've created that almost acts as a little bit of exposure therapy to the thing, builds a level of competence. It's like, cool, I am now primed and ready to do the thing if I feel like that's appropriate.
As well. Yeah, and as you say, you build the evidence. So not only like, so then you have less to argue against. I did this, I enjoy it, I'm good at it. Or I didn't enjoy this, I don't want to do this. And then that process of elimination. This is like with my gym brand, actually. I distinctly remember being like, I have so many ideas of conceptual stuff about design. I want it to be cool, edgy, this, that. It's terrible. And then it was actually only when I had a bunch of designs submitted and I was like, don't like that, don't like that, don't like that, don't like that. So it's always that process of elimination. There's got to be a good framework in here for taking people through, because yeah, it's something I've become quite interested in this stage of when you're lost. And we have so many of these places in our lives, I think, where we're like, new identity, new era, new thing, new environment.
One thing that's really stuck with me, a friend of mine said this to me once, because I've gone through all of this myself in building what I now have with the advisory and consultancy business for Hunter Brains and ADHD entrepreneurs to this podcast. They both act as 2 separate companies. This is technically a media company, whatever. I went through this period where I was like back and forth, opening loops, closing loops, opening loops, closing loops, so many conversations. And I felt like I was going around in circles. Fact that I hadn't yet figured the thing out 6 months later, when I thought it was like, I'll just fucking 2 months and I'll have this sorted. Because I closed my previous business down. I was like, right, I'm closing this down. I don't like it. I need to do something else. I would have figured it out by Q2. I hadn't. And I was like, why have I not figured this out yet? What's going on? And I remember he said to me, which just instantly shifted it, we're basically trying to create a new color. And he's like, it's going to be a very messy process. You'll have all these raw ingredients, all of these, you're bringing purple and blue together, but different shades. And you're trying to put it a bit there and mix them together. And you're like, no, that's not it. Let's back to the drawing board, get a new fresh canvas. And that perfectly articulated the experience of testing these things out, trying these experiments, trying to figure out what was next for me. It's like, let me grab an orange and let me grab a turquoise. Let's see. Well, no, I don't like that. That doesn't look good. Wipe it clean. Let's go again. And for me, that just helped me to rationalize with the messiness of everything and how it didn't feel like a straight line. It didn't feel succinct. I would do something, get halfway down a path and be like, this ain't it. And that was okay. And it let me abandon the thing without having too much negative in dialogue with, I just need to commit to it. So I remember him saying that to me, and that really made a difference for me.
Yeah, I think that's really, really nice visual representation. Yeah, that self-containedness of things is giving yourself permission almost to be like, I don't need to know what's in the future. I don't need to know what I want to do next. I'm just going to do these paint color mixes. I'm going to do these experiments, and that's it. And then you're giving yourself permission to commit to something for a dedicated time. And if you want to carry on, fine. But if you don't, whereas I think that's the thing that's always stopped me from starting, is just thinking down the line too far and like placing too much meaning on things. I think, do you know, like that must be a psychological process where my brain is yearning to have control for safety. Basically, I think it wants to understand, it wants to anticipate, and that can be really helpful. But it can also keep you safe from the things that are gonna be really fucking great in your life as well.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. Now I've got 3 quick fire questions for you before we wrap up. Number 1, what is one non-negotiable habit or system, interpret that how you will, that you've built that helps your brain work better, feel optimized, fits you?
Not very good at systems, so I'm supposed to get better at them. I'd love to have like a really expert answer here there, but I think it's just prioritizing self. When I had a very bad breakdown last year, it really like shifted my perception of like success and ambition, because basically my mental health and wellness, I basically went to depths of darkness in terms of mental health that I just didn't know existed. Not to say I hadn't like had breakdowns like many things before, but like nothing was this bad. I think, yeah, you got to prioritize your health. If you don't have your health, you ain't got nothing basically. So all the rest sits on top of that stuff, and so um, I'm also hyper aware of the energy of like movement. For me, like first of all, turning my brain requires exercise, especially for me, cycling or getting out and about where I have to concentrate on other things. But I'm super aware of how like regular movement, as much as I'm very bad and I find it hard to stick to a routine, when that's happening, the compound effect on like my mood, my energy levels, my self, like, you know, when you're like living like shit and you're eating like shit and you just feel gross in yourself. Like exercise is kind of the number one thing that feeds into everything, because then I want to eat better, then I'm cooking more, then I'm offline more, blah blah. So like everything has a balance, and yeah, I just say you have to start again. Confidence, ambition, discipline, it all comes from doing. So yeah, it's not a super compact
I get that. I think
answer, but yeah.
yeah, speaks to a model that I've got for my clients as well, which we call it the execution stack, and view it almost like Maslow's hierarchy of needs with a pyramid, and you can't ascend from one until the one beneath it is done. And at the very bottom, at like base camp, is the engine. It's the vessel. It's us. It's health, your sleep, your food, your high protein nutrition, like whatever it is. If that is compromised, no amount of productivity hack, no amount of time blocking, no amount of business strategy is going to work if the foundation is brittle. And that, so
Yeah, absolutely. And like I started therapy, for example, and I think everyone should have therapy or coaching or something, basically, I guess, defined space in their diary. And that's the other thing, by the way, nothing happens if it's not on my calendar. So if I like want to eat lunch, or I want to research AI, or like I even just want to have a therapy session, I have to go in. And I think we're all used to scheduling things like meetings, work things. You just schedule other things in your life, schedule relaxing periods, schedule daydreaming, schedule therapy, like schedule exercise, make it like a non-negotiable in the way that you would prioritize work. I think that's been incredibly useful for me. And also like a massive realization as well that like I don't need to be involved in anything. This is the thing I've struggled so much with. It's like I can see a problem, it's going on the other side of the business. And I know I could just get my teeth into it. I could fix it. I could do this and da da da. I don't need to. You know, I don't need to carry it's an ongoing work of progress. I don't need to carry the whole weight of everyone else's problems and every other problem in the business on my shoulders. I can just not do it. Yeah, I think that's just staying in my lane has always been like a difficult thing, but letting go of that and just being okay with being messy and showing up with half-baked things, that's something I'm striving to, and I will be probably my entire life, to be honest, because like my definition of if I could just like do anything, and I don't give a shit what people think. If I could like go out in my pajamas and do a dance in Oxford Circus, like that would be great. Because I just know like that level of I don't give a shit, and none of this literally matters because we're alive and then we're gone. It's a blink of an instance, and no one 3 generations will remember who you are, and even if they do, it doesn't kind of matter. Like that's what I'm striving towards. I
nice,
hope.
nice. I like it. You and me both. Now, question number 2: what's a piece of advice that either you have been given or you see everybody gives out that you actually think is bullshit for people with our brain types?
Ooh, I don't know about without brain types, but this whole well the work life balance I think is a little bit of a fallacy. I think there's a bit of a disturbing narrative online um where if you want success and you don't have everything handed to you on a plate, and you don't have a lot of wealth already, and even if you do, like you're gonna have to work really hard. That there's a fallacy that you can turn up and work 2 hours a day and da da da. And I know with AI, like maybe it changes a little bit, but there's a lot of people that are showing up that like I know have like worked 7-day weeks, and then they're like, oh, I prioritize this, but it's just bullshit. And so you're gonna have to work insanely hard, and the concept really is that you're not gonna have like work-life balance for a long time, but the idea is that by dedicating yourself into that process and just like grafting, by the way, will always be intelligence. You don't have to be smart. In fact, there's many smart overthinking people that will just again never start. And so you don't have to be special. You just have to keep showing up. You have to plug away. You have to do things, by the way, without understanding how they fit in. Uh, and with no expectation. Help people that comes back to you. Do things you don't understand how it links up, because down the line they're all going to come together. But yeah, you will need to work hard, and there will be sacrifice. Sacrifice isn't a bad thing. I think that like sacrificing discipline. There's two ends of it. There's either people that are like, I should have everything I want all the time, and then there's people who are like ice bath at 3 a.m. and blah blah. But there's like nothing in between. It's like a little bit of restriction and sacrifice bleeds creativity, innovation. Like I have no doubt that growing up with very little and being obsessed with breaking out of that enabled me to do all the things I've done. But everything is achievable. Like an ocean is just a trillion drops of water, right? So like each little thing that you do adds up into something big.
Yep, absolutely. And I cannot stand the virtue signaling of this. You see on LinkedIn a lot where people are like, oh, just don't work as hard, man. Like they've exited a company or they are, within a big business. And exactly as you said, I know that they have worked 7 days a week for 3 years to build to where they are. And now they are at a position where they don't necessarily have to. And they are signaling that that is what they did and how they've always operated to get to where they are. And it is a fallacy. And it's like, I don't know why. I think it's a degree of, it's a wave at the moment where it just makes people feel better in it. Ultimately, it's a social game, isn't it? And a status game that people want to be liked and they want people to buy into their narrative. But the reality is, you are likely selling a false narrative that gives people a false understanding and hope as to what is required to achieve good things and big things. And we're not even talking from a monetary standpoint. Like, if you want to create good art, which likely won't pay very well, it takes fucking time and it takes hard work and it takes time for you to hone the skills that are required to create great water paintings. And I think I'm hoping that we're coming out the other side of this where people are starting to realize that actually working hard and making sacrifices is also cool as fuck, because
Yeah.
you are built through the process of the work as well. The work works on you just as much as you work on it.
The process of the work without the obsession on the outcome as well. Like I was in a really interesting, it's kind of like it's a bit of South India. It's a township, essentially, experimental township that was created in like the 60s. And it's very much around like kind of forward thinking, yoga, but also like work as a transformative experience, just giving yourself over to focusing on building. Like I think creating and building something, whatever it is, and solving problems is like one of the most human things that you can do. I mean, if you think about the word company, it literally just means like other people. So you're coming together with people to solve a problem. And there is something like infinitely magical about that. You're the number one thing that will drive like self-esteem comes from responsibility. Confidence and motivation comes from routine and showing up. And yeah, I don't think people quite understand that one brain thing for me actually is that, yeah, so showing up, doing that thing is transformative, because most people experience work in a really shit framework. Like they have to work, they're on a shit wage, they're in a job they don't enjoy. But even the word work, it has negative connotations. Whereas you speak to an entrepreneur and they don't want to retire, they're already doing what they love. To retire is to take time and actually do what you want. If you've been doing that all along, then it's a very different thing. But one of the things I think that was it just came to my mind quickly, so I'll say it. When I left school, because of all the high performing, homework doing, blah blah blah, A-star students I was around, my perception of the world was that everyone was kind of like that and above me and better than me. And then I actually realized that most people don't show up. Like they don't turn up for the interview. They don't apply for the job. They don't, submit an entry for a competition. And just by doing those things, your luck infinitely increases.
Yeah, totally agreed. It like brings it nicely full circle to what we were discussing earlier around like doing the doing and not making these preconditions of trying as best as possible to not make these preconditions of I have to feel a certain type of way or I've had to achieve a certain thing before I can do the other thing. The more you just take action, the more you become obsessive about just doing the work, taking the action, creating, I think more so than working. I try and view my work now as an act of creative expression rather than working, which if I'm creating all the time, why would I want to stop if it makes me feel good? But my point being, if we can focus on doing the work and not the preconditions, you would increase your surface area of luck. And that is ultimately the game, isn't it? It's just
Yeah,
like, how big can we get
yeah,
that
so
surface
true.
area? And the bigger it is, the higher the likelihood that we stumble across whatever it is that we want to manifest as a future reality for ourselves.
So true. And stop making everything so efficient. Jesus Christ. I mean,
Yeah.
literally, you need mess, you need disorder as well. I think there's so much disorder and chaos that people always focus on like efficiencies and like maximum efficiencies for how you can like make yourself like you're not a product on a line. And actually, something my acquirer, the CEO of my acquirer said, um, you can never spend too much time thinking, which in itself can be a problem. But also, I think people don't allow for the mess. Like, so many good things and interesting things happen when you go to something that you weren't going to go to, when you show up late, when you take a different train. Like, you kind of need to allow space for that as well.
Yeah, and I think that's been optimized out of a lot of people's lives. You don't need to productivity max everything because we've gone through this great productivity wave, haven't we, with all of these creators, and I think that has squeezed out a lot of the metaphorical shower thoughts and the time. Like my week now, like I only take calls within my business on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays, Mondays and Fridays. I'm never on my laptop. I'm taking calls. I am just trying to create the environment for these metaphorical shower thoughts as much as possible, because that's where the creation element comes in. I'm reading Rick Rubin's The Creative Act, the Artist Way book, like all of these things. I'm trying to as much as possible influence my ability to create and create the positive conditions for just rumination more, but on positive things as opposed to where challenges are present. But look, Sally, I've thoroughly enjoyed today and I
Yeah, amazing.
appreciate you coming on. Where can people find out more about what this next chapter looks like for you?
I think LinkedIn and Instagram is a safe bet. I'm trying to remember my handle. Sally.winter on Instagram, which is probably more where I'm sharing like my day-to-day stuff and story at the moment. And then on LinkedIn as well. Yeah. So I have a love-hate thing with LinkedIn, but no doubt I'll be back and posting very soon.
Awesome. And I'll put all of those in the show notes as well. So any of the relevant places that we can send people to what you're doing and where you're going next, we'll put in the show notes. But thank you for coming on today and I appreciate the vulnerability and depth that we've gone to.
Likewise, been really awesome. I think it's nice to document as well the period where everyone's building in public when they've got their idea right. But I think it's nice to talk about the in between periods and how messy and uncertain they can be.
Yeah, agreed. I think I'll give a lot of people who are there'll probably be more people who are listening to this that are in that space than the other way around, where either they're in a vehicle right now that is not yet fully crystallized as to how they could potentially exit, or even if that's on the cards for them or not. So I think it's even for myself just incredibly encouraging and inspirational to talk to you today and get an insight into both sides when it has been crystallized and also the navigation of when it's not. So thank you.
Mm, appreciate